Richard Hayes stood in the marble foyer of his sprawling estate, adjusting his silk tie one final time. At 58, he had built an empire in real estate, but somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of what truly mattered. His wife, Margaret, had been the quiet strength behind his success for 32 years. She had raised their children while he chased deals across the country. Now, with silver threading through her blonde hair and gentle lines marking years of patient smiles, she deserved so much more than his distracted attention. But Richard's mind was elsewhere, focused on Veronica, a stunning brunette in her early 30s who had swept into his life like a whirlwind. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and she wore confidence, like the expensive black dress that hugged her figure. She represented everything he thought he wanted: youth, excitement, a second chance at feeling alive. "I'll be back in a week," Richard called to Margaret, who was tending to her rose garden through the kitchen window. She simply nodded, her hands gentle with the delicate petals. The private jet carried Richard and Veronica to the Tuscany vineyard he had purchased as an investment. Rolling hills stretched endlessly, dotted with olive groves and cypress trees. It should have been paradise. But as the days passed, something unexpected happened. Veronica seemed more interested in the expensive wine than the sunset views. She spent hours on her phone, posting photos, barely acknowledging the breathtaking landscape around them. One evening, as they dined on the terrace, Richard found himself thinking about Margaret, how she would have loved the way the evening light painted the hills gold, how she would have known the names of the wildflowers growing along the stone walls. "You're awfully quiet," Veronica said, not looking up from her phone. Richard realized with startling clarity that they had barely had a real conversation in days. Everything felt hollow. That night, unable to sleep, Richard stepped onto the balcony. The stars above reminded him of camping trips with Margaret and the children years ago. She had always known the constellations. He had been too busy checking emails to really notice. The next morning, Richard made a decision that surprised even himself. "I need to go home," he told Veronica over breakfast. She shrugged, already scrolling through her messages. "Fine. I'll catch up with friends in Rome." The flight back felt different somehow, longer, each mile bringing him closer to a truth he had been avoiding for too long. Richard arrived home, to find Margaret in her garden, wearing a simple sundress, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked up as his car pulled into the driveway, shielding her eyes from the afternoon sun. "You're back early," she said simply, no accusation in her voice. "Margaret," he began, then found himself at a loss for words. She set down her gardening tools and really looked at him. After 32 years of marriage, she could read his face like a familiar book. "Come sit with me," she said gently, patting the wooden bench beside her rose bushes. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, surrounded by the flowers she had nurtured with such care. The same care she had given their marriage, their family, him. "I've been a fool," Richard finally whispered. Margaret reached over and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, familiar, real, in a way that made his chest tight with emotion. "We've both made mistakes," she said quietly, "but we're still here." In that moment, Richard understood what he had almost thrown away. Not just a marriage, but a partnership built on shared history, mutual respect, and a love that had deepened rather than dimmed with time. The evening sun cast a golden glow over the garden as they talked. Really talked, for the first time, in months, about their children, now grown with families of their own, about dreams they had set aside, about the possibility of starting again, not as young lovers, but as mature people who had learned the true value of commitment. That night, as they prepared for bed, Richard looked at his wife. truly looked at her. He saw the strength in her shoulders, the wisdom in her eyes, the grace with which she had handled his betrayal. "I want to earn your trust again," he said. Margaret smiled, the same gentle smile that had captured his heart decades ago. "Then we'll take it one day at a time." Outside, the roses Margaret had tended so carefully released their fragrance into the night air, a reminder that the most beautiful things in life require patience, care, and time to truly bloom. Richard had traveled thousands of miles only to discover that home had been waiting for him all along, in the quiet strength of a woman who had never stopped believing in the possibility of second chances. As he drifted off to sleep beside his wife, Richard realized that true wealth wasn't measured in properties or investments, but in the love of someone who chose to stand by you, even when you hadn't deserved it. The next morning would bring new conversations, new commitments, and new hope. But tonight, surrounded by the scent of roses and the warmth of genuine forgiveness, Richard Hayes was finally home.